Welcome to my channel. She was laughed at, underestimated, dismissed, but what happened next stunned everyone. Former elite sniper Aria Lane takes a group of cocky recruits and turns them into soldiers who see what others can't, and survives lessons that could kill. Watch how a single shot, missed by everyone else, becomes the lesson that changes everything. Give it up, lady. You can't even hit that huge target. Laughter echoed across the shooting range, bouncing off the steel dividers. I lowered my rifle, silent as if I'd accepted defeat. The voices behind me grew bolder, smug with the certainty that I was failing right in front of them. What they didn't realize was that I hadn't aimed for the target in front of me at all. The officer stepped forward, his boots crunching on gravel. He wasn't looking at the oversized bullseye everyone else had their eyes glued to. He whispered just loud enough for the nearest recruits to hear. Check the back wall. The entire squad went dead silent. My name is Aria Lane. I'm 29 years old, and most days people take one glance at me and dismiss me as someone playing soldier, not someone who's lived it. My long auburn hair was tied back in a neat knot, my frame more delicate than imposing. To strangers, I probably looked like I belonged in an office, not at a rifle range. That morning in Fort Redding, Nevada, I'd signed up for what was supposed to be a simple reserve training evaluation. My role was just to help test new equipment, observe some of the younger recruits, and offer a bit of feedback. Easy work, quick paycheck, no spotlight. That was the plan. But plans don't usually last past the first laugh. I'd heard the whispers when I signed my name on the sheet. Aria Lane. Sounds more like an actress than a soldier. Bet she's never even fired a real rifle before. I didn't bother defending myself. I just smiled, checked my scope, and let their assumptions hang in the air. What none of them knew was that 5 years earlier, I had been one of the top snipers in Task Force Eclipse, a shadow unit that never appeared on recruiting posters. I still hold shots in the record books that people debate at conferences and in online forums, wondering if they were even possible. My longest confirmed kill was at 1,850 meters, in winds that should have bent the bullet off course like a kite string. But I left the military under circumstances I never enjoy retelling. Now I keep my life small: freelance training, private contracts, lessons for police or security officers. Cash only. No paperwork. No trails. This reserve exercise was just supposed to be another job. The range officer barked for positions, and 24 shooters lined up, mostly young men, full of chatter and bravado. They were eager to prove themselves, trading tips about stances and breathing, bragging about scores they claimed to have posted before. I didn't join in. I settled quietly at lane 12, laid out my mat, and adjusted into the prone position. The sun was already heating the desert floor, and the mirage shimmer was going to make every target dance like a ghost. The official target was at 300 meters. Big, standard bullseye. A child with decent coaching could hit it. But through my scope, I noticed something else. Beyond the obvious row of targets, partly hidden by stacked concrete barriers, someone had set up additional bullseyes at longer ranges. Test plates for the afternoon course, no doubt. One of them, sitting on the far back wall nearly 500 meters out, caught my eye. It was small, no bigger than a saucer, and lined up so that the only way to hit it from my lane was to thread a shot perfectly between the support beams of the 300-meter target. 6 inches of clearance either side. A dare written in steel. I couldn't resist. The range officer gave the order to fire. My first round cracked, streaking wide of the easy target. Gasps, then snickers. By the time my second shot missed the bullseye again, the laughter was louder. Somebody get her a bigger target. Maybe the size of Nevada. Hey lady, maybe try darts instead. I stayed silent. My breath was steady, my hands unshaken. I knew exactly what I was doing. When I squeezed the trigger the third time, the range filled with chuckles and claps. The sound of victory for everyone convinced I had just proven myself a fraud. Then Sergeant David Ross, the supervising officer that day, raised his voice. Before we move on, I want everyone to do something for me. The laughter tapered off. His tone carried weight. Turn around. Look at the back wall. Confused murmurs swept through the shooters as they turned their heads. Way out at the edge of the range, nearly invisible in the haze, was that little 500-meter plate. One recruit jogged all the way out to check. When he reached it, he stopped, turned back, and shouted at the top of his lungs. Dead center. Perfect bullseye. The silence that followed was absolute. I slowly stood, cleared my rifle, and slung it over my shoulder. I didn't need to say a word. The bullet had spoken for me. And though none of them knew it yet, this was only the beginning. The crowd of recruits stood frozen, their earlier smirks carved into silence. The air itself felt heavier, as though the desert had swallowed their laughter whole. Sergeant Ross paced slowly down the line, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his sunglasses hiding whatever expression might have betrayed him. I could feel the tension in his steps, the way every bootfall echoed louder than it should have. When he stopped directly behind me, he raised his voice so all 24 could hear. "Let me tell you who you just spent the last 10 minutes laughing at." I kept my eyes forward, the desert wind brushing my cheek. My shoulders tightened. This was the part one hated: exposure. This, Ross continued, pointing toward me, is Aria Lane, former Staff Sergeant Lane of the 3rd Recon Battalion, Task Force Eclipse. The name meant nothing to most of them, but I caught the slight shift in the posture of the older reservists. They'd heard whispers. The word eclipse was usually followed by silence. Ross went on, his voice steady, carrying authority and a faint edge of pride. She was one of the lead snipers in that unit. 49 confirmed kills, most of them over a kilometer out. Her longest confirmed was 1,850 meters, sandstorm, crosswinds up to 30 miles per hour. Target was an enemy sniper who'd been killing our guys for 3 days straight. The silence deepened. Even the cockiest recruits weren't laughing now. They were listening. Ross's tone hardened. "She made that shot with a damaged rifle. Scope cracked, barrel warped from shrapnel. She calculated the trajectory in her head and took it with iron sights." A ripple moved through the line. Some of the recruits actually turned pale. One of them, a kid barely 20 who had been loudest with his heckling, raised his hand hesitantly. If she was that good, why'd she leave? Ross glanced at me. He didn't speak for me, not without permission. I gave him the smallest nod. 3 years ago, Ross said carefully, Staff Sergeant Lane was on overwatch in Syria. Mission was to eliminate a high-value commander responsible for dozens of attacks. Range, 800 meters. Clear shot. Command gave the order. I finally turned around, my eyes meeting theirs. But when I looked through the scope, I said quietly, there were children in the courtyard, playing less than 20 feet from the target. No one moved. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Command said acceptable collateral damage. I continued. My voice was calm, but inside I felt the weight of it again, the memory pressing like a stone on my chest. They ordered me to take the shot. I refused. Gasps broke the silence. I waited 6 hours for the children to clear. Command kept calling, kept telling me to fire. I stayed on the trigger, but I didn't pull it. Ross picked up the thread. Eventually, a ground team went in. Took longer, cost more resources, risked more lives. But no children died. My voice was steady. The target was eliminated. The mission was a success. But Command decided I was unreliable under pressure. They called me too emotional. An older man at the end of the line, clearly a veteran himself, muttered under his breath, but loud enough for all to hear. That's not weakness. That's the kind of judgment we need more of. Several heads nodded. Even the kid who had mocked me earlier looked down at his boots, his face burning with shame. "Ma'am," he stammered. "I'm sorry for what I said earlier. We didn't know." "You shouldn't have to know," I said softly. "Respect shouldn't be earned with resumes. It should be given until someone proves they don't deserve it." I gestured toward the distant plate I'd hit. That shot wasn't about showing off. It was about something else. In combat, the obvious target isn't always the real threat. The hidden one, the one no one's looking for, that's the one that kills you. Their faces were wrapped now, every trace of laughter gone. Ross nodded. That's why she aimed for the plate behind the 300-meter bullseye. The easy shot wasn't the real test. The real threat was the one most of you never even noticed. He scanned the group. How many of you saw that secondary target when you set up? Only 5 hands went up, slowly. And how many of you would have chosen to fire at it instead of the easy points? Every hand went down. That's the difference, Ross said firmly, between shooters and warriors. The desert stretched silent around us, but I could feel the shift. Their eyes weren't mocking anymore. They were searching, curious, maybe even a little hungry for something they hadn't known they were missing. One young woman raised her hand. "Ma'am, Can you teach us? Not just the shooting, but how to see like that. I took a slow breath. My answer would matter. The desert heat shimmered between us, and for a moment, no one spoke. The young woman who'd asked the question, sharp eyes, steady voice, kept her hand raised, waiting. I let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Finally, I said, it's not about the shooting. Confused frowns flickered across their faces. Any of you can learn to hit a bullseye at 300 meters. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll have you punching holes dead center every time. That part's easy. What's hard is training your mind to see the battlefield, not just the target in front of you. I pointed back toward the plate I'd struck, half hidden at 500 meters. That shot wasn't about skill. It was about awareness. Real threats don't announce themselves. They're concealed, inconvenient, farther than you expect. And if you spend all your energy on what's obvious, you'll never even notice the danger that matters. The recruits shifted uncomfortably. I could see them replaying the morning, realizing how many of them hadn't even scanned past the primary bullseye. Ross crossed his arms. He was watching me with that expression commanders sometimes get when they see a path open that wasn't in the original plan. Lane, he said carefully, these soldiers could benefit from more than just this evaluation. Would you consider sticking around a while? I raised an eyebrow. How long is a while? Long enough to drill them past the obvious. 2 weeks, maybe more. We could call it a specialized course. Tactical awareness and advanced marksmanship. The recruits perked up, their earlier arrogance replaced with something closer to eagerness. Even the kid who had mocked me the loudest was staring at me with something like hope. I shook my head slightly. I'm not here to play instructor. I was contracted for today. That's it. But then the young woman who had asked the question stepped forward, her hand lowering slowly. Ma'am, we need this. We don't just want to shoot better, we want to survive better. You saw something we didn't. That means, if this were combat, we'd be dead. Her words carried weight. More than I expected. I met her eyes. What's your name? Private Kayla Moore. All right, Private Moore. You want me to teach you how to see like that? It won't be easy. You'll hate it half the time. It won't feel like shooting practice. It'll feel like your brain is being rewired. She nodded without hesitation. Yes, ma'am. Behind her, other heads bobbed in agreement. Even the young man, Martinez, I remembered from the roster, looked ready to beg if that's what it took. I exhaled slowly. I'd left teaching behind for a reason. Every lesson meant opening old doors I'd fought to keep closed. But staring at them now, I realized something. No one had ever taught them this before. And if they left here thinking bullseyes were all that mattered, they'd walk into real combat blind. Ross must have seen the conflict on my face, because he spoke again. You don't owe us anything. But you might just save lives if you say yes. The desert wind tugged at my hair, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder. I thought of the courtyard in Syria, the children playing, the order I'd refused. I thought of how close I'd come to losing myself that day, and how much it had cost me to hold my ground. Slowly, I nodded. 2 weeks. But I set the terms. The recruits straightened, a current of anticipation rippling through them. First term, I said, you stop worrying about impressing anyone. You're not here to look good. You're here to think good. Second term, you don't question the drills, even if they feel pointless. They won't be. And third, I paused, letting my gaze sweep over them. You remember that one missed shot in the right direction is better than 100 perfect bullseyes in the wrong one. Ross's lips twitched into something like a smile. Sounds like we've got ourselves a course. Martinez raised his hand, hesitant but earnest. Ma'am, can I still join? Even after? His voice trailed off, embarrassed. I studied him for a long moment. Then I gave a short nod. Especially you. For the first time that day, he smiled. Not the cocky grin he'd worn before, but something genuine, almost relieved. The desert sun pressed down hotter, but I felt a chill settle inside me. Because I knew what I had just agreed to. 2 weeks of teaching meant 2 weeks of reliving the instincts I'd tried to bury. And whether I liked it or not, these soldiers were about to drag me back into a world I thought I'd left behind. The next morning, the recruits showed up at the range earlier than scheduled. Some had barely slept. I could see it in the heavy eyes, the jitter of nerves. The bravado from the day before had been replaced by something quieter. Expectation. I arrived last, carrying nothing but my rucksack and an old thermos of black coffee. They were lined up in formation, rifles slung, waiting for orders. Ross stood nearby, watching but not interfering. This was my show now. I let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. You thought this would be about targets and scores. It's not. From today forward, you'll stop thinking like shooters and start thinking like survivors. Confused glances rippled through the line. I dropped my rucksack, unzipped it, and pulled out a stack of folded cardboard cutouts. They were shaped like civilians, children, women, unarmed men. I propped them along the firing lanes, interspersed with enemy silhouettes. The recruits stiffened. Your job isn't just to hit the bad guys, I said evenly. It's to not hit the wrong ones. That means scanning, identifying, and controlling your fire. If you can't do that, you're a danger to your own team. Private Martinez raised his hand cautiously. So, this isn't about accuracy anymore? I met his eyes. Accuracy is useless without judgment. A perfect shot in the wrong place is still a failure. They shifted uneasily, but no one argued. The first drill was chaos. Targets popped up at varying ranges, some obvious, some partially hidden. I watched through binoculars as they fired hastily, more concerned with not missing than with thinking. By the time the smoke cleared, more than half had shot through a civilian cutout. Ross whistled low under his breath. I stepped forward, my voice hard. On a battlefield, those cardboard silhouettes are children. Parents. Innocent people caught in the wrong place. Everyone you hit today would have been a life lost on your watch. That's the difference between a shooter and a soldier. The shame was heavy. Some looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I softened my tone. But that's why you're here. To learn. And you will. By the end of the week, the exercises had grown harder. I added smoke, distractions, multiple overlapping threats. I made them crawl into position with packs on, calculating shots while their lungs burned. No one got a fire until they answered 3 questions out loud. What am I shooting at? What's behind my target? What am I not seeing? At first, it slowed them down. Some grumbled. But slowly, something began to change. They started scanning differently. Heads on a swivel. Eyes catching details they'd missed before. The obvious targets no longer drew their immediate fire. They hesitated, calculated, made sure there wasn't something more important hiding in the shadows. Martinez, to my surprise, worked harder than anyone. He stayed after hours, practicing wind calls and scanning drills long after the others left. One evening, I found him kneeling at the firing line, repeating the 3 questions to himself like a prayer. Trying to make it stick? I asked. He startled, then nodded. Ma'am, I don't want to be the guy who laughs when he should be looking. Not again. I studied him a moment, then gave a small nod. Good. Remember that feeling. It'll save lives one day. By the end of week 1, they weren't the same group that had mocked me. They were leaner, sharper, hungrier. Their shots weren't just hitting targets. They were hitting the right ones. But I knew the real test still waited. Because it wasn't enough to shoot under pressure. They needed to learn to think under it. And that lesson would come sooner than any of us expected. By the second week, the recruits had stopped asking about scores. No one bragged about groupings or bullseyes anymore. They were too busy sweating under packs, crawling through dust, scanning every shadow on the range like their lives depended on it. That morning, I told them, today, we stop pretending this is training. Today, you're going to learn what chaos feels like. Ross raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He trusted me now. I led the group out to the far side of the range where we'd set up an improvised village. Plywood walls, fake windows, door frames, and alleys. Cardboard silhouettes were scattered throughout, some hostile, some neutral, some hidden almost completely. The recruits murmured nervously. This isn't about who shoots first, I said. It's about who thinks first. In combat, hesitation kills, but so does recklessness. You're going to run this course one at a time. You'll have 30 seconds to clear it. Every mistake costs lives. Every wasted shot costs time you don't have. Private Moore was first. She took a deep breath, stepped into the village, and began moving. I watched through binoculars as she hesitated at the first corner, then smoothly neutralized a hidden target in the window. But she missed the faint outline of another silhouette in the shadows. In a real fight, that would have been her end. She came out frustrated, muttering under her breath. I told her calmly, you saw 90%. That 10 you missed? That's the one that kills you. Go again tomorrow. One by one, the recruits entered the mock village. Some fired too fast, hitting civilian cutouts. Others hesitated too long and died, with threats still on the field. Then came Martinez. He stepped in steady, not rushing, not stalling. He hugged cover, his rifle tight, eyes scanning constantly. First threat, clean headshot. Second, neutralized with 2 rounds through the chest. He held his fire when a civilian cutout popped up in his scope, even though it was placed perfectly to tempt a mistake. When he emerged 30 seconds later, he'd cleared the course without a single casualty. The others clapped him on the back. For the first time, Martinez didn't grin like he had something to prove. He just nodded, humble, like he finally understood the weight of what he'd done. But the test wasn't over. "Listen up," I said. "All of you ran that course alone. That's not real life. Out there, you'll never be alone. Tomorrow, you run it as teams. And I promise you, working together will be harder than working alone." I saw some exchange uneasy looks. It was true. Shooters often made terrible teammates. That night, as the sun bled into the Nevada desert, I sat alone on the edge of the range, sipping cold coffee from my thermos. The recruits had gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just training for them. I thought about Syria again, about the courtyard, about how one decision had rewritten my life. I wasn't just teaching them how to shoot. I was teaching them how to carry the weight of choosing not to shoot. And as I watched the horizon darken, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself in years. I needed this training as much as they did. The next morning, the recruits shuffled onto the range with a mix of nerves and anticipation. They'd all heard me the day before. Clearing the course alone was one thing. Doing it as a team, that was different. I lined them up in pairs. Listen closely. Out there, you'll never operate in a vacuum. Every move you make affects the person next to you. Every mistake you make puts someone else at risk. Today, you're not just responsible for yourself, you're responsible for each other. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others nodded like they understood, but I knew most of them didn't. Not yet. Private Moore was paired with Private Grant, a big man with quick reflexes but a tendency to shoot first and think later. I watched them step into the plywood village. At first, it looked smooth. Moore scanned high while Grant cleared low. But halfway through, a civilian cutout appeared in a doorway. Moore held her fire, but Grant's finger twitched before his brain caught up. One round ripped through the cutout. When they came out, Moore's jaw was tight, her eyes burning. "That's a child you just killed," I told Grant flatly. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but shut it again when he saw the look on Moore's face. "This isn't about being faster," I continued. "It's about being right. Hesitation can kill, but so can arrogance." The lesson stung. I let it sting. Next was Martinez and a quiet recruit named Collins. They moved carefully, covering each other's sectors. Martinez actually stopped Collins once, pressing a hand to his shoulder before Collins fired at a questionable silhouette. When they cleared the course, not a single civilian was hit. Ross leaned toward me. "He's come a long way in 2 weeks." I nodded. "Because he's learning humility. That's rarer than accuracy." But not every team fared so well. One pair argued mid-course about who should cover what angle, wasting precious seconds. Another left an enemy silhouette standing behind a window, too focused on their assigned lanes to notice. When they finished, I gathered them all. "You learned something today," I told them. "You learned that ego and pride are luxuries you can't afford. Out there, you won't remember who fired the cleanest shot. You'll remember who you could trust to watch your back." The silence was heavy, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not shame, reflection. That evening, as the desert cooled and the recruits packed up, Martinez lingered. He held his rifle loose at his side, his face thoughtful. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" I raised an eyebrow. "Depends on the question. You said you refused that order, the one in Syria. Do you ever regret it?" I stared past him, out at the horizon where the sun was dying in streaks of red. My answer came slower than I expected. "Every day," I admitted. "But not for the reasons you think." He frowned. "Then why?" "Because it shouldn't have taken that moment to teach me what I should have been teaching all along. That sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take." He didn't say anything after that. He just nodded, as if he understood more than he could put into words. For the first time in years, I felt a weight in my chest ease, just slightly. Maybe these 2 weeks weren't just about them learning from me. Maybe I was relearning something too. By the start of the second week's final stretch, the recruits had begun moving with a different rhythm. Less swagger, more calculation. Less talk, more scanning. but I knew they still hadn't been truly tested. That morning, I walked them into the village course again. Only this time, it looked different. I had worked half the night with Ross and 2 other instructors, rearranging everything, moving walls, setting new silhouettes, planting hidden threats where they'd never expect them. When the recruits saw it, their faces fell. "This looks worse than last time," one muttered. I didn't correct him. Worse is a good word. "Today, you run in squads of 4. Civilians are scattered throughout. There are multiple threats, and you've got 90 seconds to clear it. Any slower, and reinforcements arrive, and you're done." They swallowed hard. The first squad stumbled badly. 2 fired at the same target, while leaving an exposed silhouette behind them. 1 civilian cutout fell to stray rounds. They emerged winded and frustrated, but I only said, "Chaos doesn't wait for you to catch up. Go again tomorrow." The second squad fared no better, too many voices shouting at once, no leadership, no rhythm. Then came the third squad: Moore, Grant, Martinez, and Collins. From the start, I could see the difference. Moore was steady, her voice calm as she called out sectors. Martinez was sharp, spotting threats the others nearly missed. Collins hesitated at one doorway, but instead of freezing, Grant covered him, giving him time to recover. They moved like a unit, not like 4 individuals. But then it happened. Near the end of the course, a silhouette popped up in a second-story window, partially obscured, difficult to distinguish in the shadows. Collins swung his rifle up, finger tightening on the trigger. I saw Martinez's hand flash out, pressing his barrel down just in time. "That's a civilian," he hissed. The hesitation cost them seconds. The timer buzzed before they cleared the last corner. They failed the clock, but they hadn't killed a civilian. When they emerged, sweat streaking their faces, Ross glanced at me. "Call it a loss." I shook my head. No, they failed the clock, but they passed the real test. The recruits exchanged glances, confused. I addressed them all. "You think the timer is what matters. It's not. In real combat, time pressure is constant. But no matter how fast you move, one wrong shot can undo everything. Choosing not to fire, that saved lives today. Don't forget that." Collins still looked shaken, but Martinez clapped him on the shoulder. "Next time, we'll be faster." But at least nobody died. The others nodded. For the first time, I saw them begin to understand that the real victory wasn't measured in seconds or points. It was measured in who walked out alive. That night, after the recruits left, Ross lingered with me. "You know," he said, "they'll never look at training the same way again." "Good," I answered. "Because the battlefield doesn't care about their scores." I stared out across the empty range, where the plywood walls cast long shadows in the fading light. Something in my chest tightened. I'd built this test for them, but I was the one haunted by the memory of a real courtyard, real shadows, and real children. And the truth was, every time they made the right choice, it felt like maybe I hadn't made mine in vain. The final evaluation wasn't on the range. That would have been too simple, too controlled. Instead, I worked with Ross to design something closer to what they'd face in the field, an all-day exercise, sprawling across a scrubland training ground on the outskirts of Fort Reading. At dawn, I gathered them at the edge of the course. 38 reservists stood in formation, their rifles clean, their gear heavy. Dust swirled in the pale morning light. "This isn't just a shooting test," I told them. "This is everything we've been working on. You'll move in squads. You'll navigate terrain. You'll identify threats, protect civilians, and make decisions when you're tired, hungry, and stretched thin. There won't be a clear end. It will end when you prove you can hold together under pressure." Nervous glances passed through the group. I didn't soften it. "Some of you will die today. Some squads won't finish. That's reality. But every choice you make will teach you something, if you're paying attention." They set off at first light. I shadowed them with binoculars from a ridgeline, instructors feeding scenarios into the course through radios and pop-up targets. Sometimes an enemy would appear close, easy shots meant to tempt them into tunnel vision. Other times, silhouettes were hidden deep in shadow, forcing them to scan and think. Civilian cutouts were mixed into crowds, carried on poles by instructors moving unpredictably through the terrain. The first few hours went better than expected. They moved cautiously, scanning with discipline, calling out sectors like we'd practiced. But fatigue sets in faster than pride admits. By midday, mistakes crept in. One squad forgot to post rear security and got ambushed from behind. Another fired too quickly into a tree line, clipping a civilian cutout. Their groans carried across the valley when the exercise marshal called them out. I let the sting sink in. By late afternoon, the heat was brutal. Sweat-soaked uniforms, tempers flared, and even the sharpest recruits were dragging their boots. That's when I knew the real test had begun. Martinez's squad hit the hardest scenario of the day, a staged ambush with overlapping threats and civilians caught in the middle. The easy answer was to fire immediately. But instead, I heard Martinez's voice, calm and clipped, cutting through the chaos. Hold fire. Check fields. Moore, left side. Grant, cover the alley. Collins, eyes high. They paused just long enough to identify the hidden shooters tucked into the windows, the civilians crossing between them. When the first shots cracked, they weren't rushed, they were precise. Every hostile dropped. Not one civilian was touched. It wasn't flawless, they still took too long, and the clock would have been unforgiving in real combat, but it was clean. Smarter than anything they'd done in the last 2 weeks. By nightfall, when the squads dragged themselves back to the rally point, they were caked in dust and exhaustion. Some had died on the course. All had made mistakes, but they were different soldiers than the ones I'd met 2 weeks ago. I stood in front of them, my voice carrying in the dusk. You're not perfect. You never will be. Out there, no one is. But you're sharper. You see more than you did. You think differently. And that will keep you alive longer than perfect aim ever could. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, they began to clap. Hesitant at first, then building into something steady, not for themselves, but for the lesson that had changed them. And as I stood there under the desert sky, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Pride. Not for myself. For them. For what they'd become in just 2 weeks. And maybe, just maybe, for the part of me that had finally started to believe again. The training course ended at dusk, but no one left right away. The recruits lingered in small clusters, talking in low voices, some replaying the day's mistakes, others laughing quietly in the way only exhausted soldiers can. I sat alone on the tailgate of a Humvee, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos. I'd planned to dismiss them formally, shake Ross's hand, and disappear like I always did. That was safer, cleaner. But Martinez approached first, holding something wrapped in cloth. Behind him came Moore, Grant, Collins, and the rest of the squad. Soon, the whole group was standing in front of me. Martinez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we wanted you to have this." He handed me the bundle. I unwrapped it slowly and froze. Inside was the steel plate from the back wall of the range. The one I had hit dead center on my first day here. The shot they all thought I missed. Across its surface were dozens of signatures, scrawled in black marker. Along the edge, in bold letters, someone had written, "Thank you for opening our eyes." For the first time in a long time, words failed me. I looked up, and all 38 of them were watching me. Expectant, respectful, no laughter in their eyes. Only gratitude. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "You don't know what this means to me." Moore shook her head. "No, ma'am. We don't. But we know what you gave us. And we won't forget it." I traced my fingers over the cold steel, the memory of that shot flashing back. The laughter. The silence after. The way Ross had revealed who I was when I would have preferred to stay hidden. And I realized this wasn't just about them learning to shoot smarter. This was about me remembering why I picked up a rifle in the first place. Martinez asked softly, "Do you regret refusing that order? The one that got you discharged?" I met his eyes. He deserved an honest answer. "Every day," I said, "but not because I think I was wrong. I regret that it took so long for someone to teach you what I learned the hard way. That sometimes, missing the obvious target is the only way to hit what really matters." The recruits were silent, but their silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of understanding, full of respect. I lifted the plate slightly, showing them the signatures. This is the first time in years I've felt like that decision meant something beyond my own life. Ross, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke. His voice was low, but it carried. "You saved them, Aria. And in doing so, you just saved every one of these soldiers, too. Don't ever doubt that." The desert wind picked up, tugging at my hair. For once, I didn't resist the weight pressing at my chest. I let myself feel it, the grief, the pride, the relief. Because for the first time since Syria, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a soldier again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as I always do. Old habits never die, especially the ones drilled and under fire. I stood by the range alone, the desert stretching silent and endless, the steel plate in my hands. The signatures caught the first light, black lines glowing faintly against the metal. I thought of every soldier who had signed it, those who had once mocked me, those who had nearly killed civilians in training, those who had finally learned to see what was hidden. Ross approached quietly, coffee in hand. Heading out, he asked. I nodded. My part's done. They don't need me anymore. He studied me a moment, then said, You're wrong. They'll carry you with them every time they shoulder a rifle. That doesn't end here. I didn't answer. Sometimes silence says more. Later that morning, I gathered the recruits one last time. They formed up without being told, different from the noisy, cocky group I'd met 2 weeks ago. These weren't just shooters anymore. They were soldiers learning to think like warriors. I held up the steel plate. This isn't about a perfect shot. It's about what it represents. That day you thought I missed. You laughed. But I wasn't aiming at the obvious target. I was aiming at the one that mattered. I let the words sink in. In life, you'll face the same choice. The world will tempt you to hit the easy target, the one everyone can see, the one that earns you applause. But the real threats are rarely obvious. They're hidden, inconvenient, harder to reach. And sometimes, taking that shot will look like failure to everyone else. I scanned their faces one by one. Moore, steady as ever. Martinez, humbled but hungry. Grant, no longer so quick to pull the trigger. Collins, thoughtful in ways he hadn't been before. The best shots, I said quietly, aren't always the ones that hit the biggest targets. Sometimes, they're the ones no one else even notices. And sometimes, the right shot is the one you don't take at all. The silence was complete. No laughter, no smirks, just understanding. I handed the plate back to Martinez. This belongs to all of you now. Keep it as a reminder. Every decision you make out there will matter, and you'll only ever get one shot. When it was time to leave, I slung my pack and walked toward the transport. The desert wind pushed against me, carrying the faint echo of voices behind me. 38 voices shouting in unison. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Lane. I stopped, closed my eyes, and let the words wash over me. For years, I had carried the weight of one decision, the refusal to fire, the label of unreliable. But standing there, hearing those voices, I understood something I hadn't before. That wasn't the day my career ended. It was the day I finally became the soldier I was meant to be. As I walked into the rising sun, I knew the ghosts of my past would always follow me. But now, for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking ahead of them. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally taken the shot that mattered most.